Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to cover Lesson 2 of the Python for Data Analytics course module in AHA. In this lesson, we're going to cover Jupyter Notebook. In the previous lesson, we covered a brief introduction to the Anaconda 3 Python distribution and the Spider IDE. We opened up Anaconda Navigator, and that's how we launched Spider. I said there was another program in Navigator that we're going to use in this course, and that other program is called Jupyter Notebook. If we look at the description for Jupyter Notebook, we see that Notebook is a web-based interactive computing notebook environment. Edit and run human-readable docs while describing the data analysis. So a notebook in itself is really a combination of code with a typeset description of the code. So we're not maintaining two documents. One document is a write-up of our data processing pipeline, our analysis techniques, our steps, our results, our discussion, and then we have the separate document, which is our code. Instead, a notebook really combines these two into a step-by-step exploratory process that really tells a story. And I'll show you a few examples of notebooks today. In fact, you've already been exposed to them, and it'll give you more of a sense of why Jupyter Notebooks are so great for the data science community. There are two main ways to launch a Jupyter Notebook. One is right from Navigator. I can just click launch right here, and it's going to spool up a Jupyter Notebook server running on my machine, localhost. In order to gain access to the graphical viewer for the notebook server, I need to open this URL in my web browser, and I will see this nice graphical user interface for the directory structure where this Jupyter Notebook server was spooled up. So this is running on my machine, localhost on port 8888, and here's the tree directory structure. So this is, in fact, my home directory. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close this and show you another way to launch Jupyter Notebook, which is my preferred way of launching it. Let's kill this. So I usually open up a terminal on a Unix-based machine or a command prompt on a Windows machine, and I navigate to a directory where I'm going to work in. So I've already navigated to AHA. This is the directory where I have all of the notes for this class in the form of Jupyter Notebooks. So now I can just type Jupyter Notebook, and this is going to create a Jupyter Notebook server in this current working directory where my terminal is running, which is what I want for this particular instance. So I will open up this URL, and now I see the directory structure for my AHA folder. Let's go ahead and click on Lessons, and we'll see I have a bunch of .ipynb files. Now these are IPython notebook files. If I click on PDA-L2-IPYNB, this is going to launch my notebook associated with the notes for today's lesson. So let me explain the difference between this tab here and the original tab I had launched earlier. So this new tab I just opened up is actually running the notebook with a Python 3 kernel associated with it, which means I can run Python code in my browser that I write in a code cell in this Jupyter Notebook. Now, if I were to save this .ipynb file and host it somewhere on the web, for example on GitHub, which is where it is currently hosted, in GSprint23, that's my profile in my repository AHA in the lessons folder. Here is pda-l2.ipynb. And you'll see that GitHub does have support for rendering IPython notebooks on its site, which is very neat. So if I route this URL, this identifier for this file on one of my GitHub repositories through a site called Notebook Viewer hosted on mbviewer.jupyter.org, then I can get a really nice HTML website style representation of my notebook. Now, this is not going to be executable. I can't run Python code in this notebook, but I can see the code nicely syntax highlighted and typeset in a code cell, and the output for this code cell will occur immediately below it. And this output doesn't just have to be text-based. In fact, we're going to see that we can have matplotlib plots show up in line in our Jupyter Notebook from running code in our browser, which is very cool. So I'm going to shift back over to the notebook so that we can see the different types of cells in a Jupyter Notebook and how we can run code like this code cell here. So here we are in Jupyter Notebook, and we're in the editor versus the notebook viewer. And there's a really great resource I recommend you check out called the User Interface Tour. If you go up to Help and you click on User Interface Tour, then you can walk through some of the main features of how to use Jupyter Notebook, and that's going to give you a really great introduction to working with Notebook. I'm going to just go over the basics in this video, relying on the fact that you will take the time to do the User Interface Tour because it is so helpful. So Jupyter Notebooks are essentially a list of cells, and each cell can be one of 4 types: a code cell, a markdown cell, a raw cell, or a heading cell. Now, we're going to mostly work with 1 and 2, code cells and markdown cells, because essentially you can include a header in a markdown cell, and I'll explain that here shortly. So let's start with a code cell. So here's a code cell. You can see the cell is highlighted and it's in edit mode. It's this green box around the code cell. If I press escape to exit edit mode, it turns blue, and now this code cell is in view mode. I'll click again, and here I have a short little program that's going to print out 0 through 4 with smiley faces in between. Now, if I press Control Enter, that's going to run this cell in place. And I'll change this just so you can see that it actually is running in this code. Excuse me, this code cell is actually being executed. So this is really neat because above this code cell, I could have a markdown cell where I'm describing in detail what I'm about to do in this code cell. Or maybe afterwards, I might have a markdown cell that describes the results of this code cell. Now let's take a look at markdown cells. So markdown cells are cells that support the Markdown markup language. If you haven't worked with Markdown before, I highly recommend following this link and doing a Google search for a Markdown tutorial. There's a really great one, markdowntutorial.com, or taking a look at one of the appendices. I've included some basic Markdown commands that you'll likely want and need to use in this course. Now, if I just click on this Markdown cell, then it is selected, but it's in view mode. If I double click, then that enters edit mode. And now I can see the source code for this Markdown cell. So these 4 pound signs or hashtag signs here denote this is a level 4 header, and here is my paragraph text here. One thing that's also really neat about the Markdown cells is their support for the math typesetting language or functionality called LaTeX. And so you can include very nicely typeset mathematical formulas in your Markdown cells. Control Enter again will run this cell, essentially taking us from the source into how it would be rendered in a browser. Here are some really useful shortcuts for use with Jupyter Notebook. So typically you're going to have a cell that's going to solve a small problem of your data analysis system. And you're going to run that code cell and then maybe write some text to describe it, either above or below it in a Markdown cell. So the commands you're going to be using is make new cells, run cells, delete cells, etc. So Control Enter will run a cell in place. I've showed you that. Shift Enter will run the current cell and then jump to the next cell below. And if there isn't a next cell below, it'll automatically insert one for you. Also helpful is Escape will get you out of command mode and Enter will get you into command mode. So that's kind of the blue versus green cell highlighting I showed you earlier. Other useful commands include inserting cells. I use this one all the time. I will write some code or write some Markdown. I'll press Escape to get out of edit mode and into command mode, and then I'll press B to insert a new cell below. New cells by default are going to be code cells. So if I want to convert that code cell to a Markdown cell, I'll use Command M in command mode, or to take that Markdown cell to a code cell, then I'll do Command Y. And double D is to delete a cell. The last thing I want to show you related to Jupyter Notebooks includes spell check. So the default installation for Jupyter Notebook does not include a spell checker, but there's a third-party site that I've hosted the link here for that has a Jupyter Notebook toolbar plugin for spell check. And if you download and install it, then you'll get a spell checker that will appear up in your toolbar. And it's really useful for your Markdown cells. I'll go ahead and download and install this, and you'll see it in my future Jupyter Notebooks.